everyone to our Global Nexus educational series seminar, What Can I Do with My PhD? Today, we have the honor of welcoming Professor Alejandro Adem. He is the president of NSERC, and he has been since 2019. He's also a faculty member at the University of British Columbia in mathematics. And before joining NSERC, he was also the CEO and scientific director of MyTax. And he has also served as the director of the Pacific Institute of the Mathematical Sciences. And he wears a large number of hats. He's currently vice chair of the governing board of the Global Research Council, a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, a fellow of the American Mathematical Society and of the Canadian Mathematical Society, and a corresponding member of the Mexican Academy of Sciences. He's won a number of awards, and he's also a Canada Research Chair at UBC and United States National Science Foundation, previously Young Investigator. So thank you very much, Professor Adem, for being here today. I will let you take it away.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I want to say hello to the audience. I guess, let me see. Can we see the participants? I guess we can't, right? So I'm going to talk a bit about my own career trajectory, make a few remarks about the career trajectory for PhDs, and then welcome your questions about the current situation and possibilities that PhD students have for their development as members of society, not just in academia. So I'll say a little bit about myself so that you can understand my perspective. So I grew up in Mexico City. I am from Mexico, and I was an undergraduate at the National University of Mexico. I would say the first key decision in my life was choosing what I was going to study, because back then and there, the careers, when you entered university, you more or less chose what you were going to be doing. So I chose mathematics. The reason I chose math is because if you understood math, then you wouldn't have to memorize things. And I don't know, in hindsight, I think I got it right. So I entered there, and what's interesting about the university in Mexico City, it's a public university with about 300,000 students. So it was an experience for me. You know, the classes were packed. There were people from all over the city. You know, the tuition was about, I think, $10 per year. So it was really a very important opportunity that folks took to learn and then become professionals, right, in engineering, medicine, and a few in mathematics, right? So it was a great experience for me to rub shoulders and work with people from all over Mexico City there. So very traditional curriculum. So I took 32 math courses. That was it. No courses in any other subject. So people have different backgrounds. That's one of the things that one learns when you're working in science, is that you will meet people with coming from different countries and with different points of view and different backgrounds, but always with a passion for science and engineering or whatever area they're working on, right? So now, when I was a student there, I consulted with folks as to where to go for graduate school, and I went to where I applied, and I got into a number of schools in the US. So I went to Princeton University to do my PhD. And so that was, again, quite an experience. You get there and wow, it's really intimidating. I remember, you know, I flew to Kennedy, JFK with my suitcase, arrived there, and a lot of very smart people there. And the main thing I would always tell myself is, well, you know what you know, just be honest and see how far you can go. And it was a very interesting system they had there. All the grades were asterisks. So there were no A's, no B's, no C's. He just would attend a course and learn as much as possible. And the idea was that you would develop as an independent scholar. Now, this is special to math because there's no lab involved, right? And we had a relationship with an advisor and then with our professors. But I thought it was a very interesting, ingenious way of bringing people into the fold, kind of in a gentle way. There were a few who wouldn't finish the program, but generally speaking, the success rate was pretty high because they were pretty, the classes were fairly small. And anyway, it had those characteristics that you'd expect. But I would say the professors were very welcoming and very egalitarian in their own way, because they understood that today's student would be tomorrow's scholar or tomorrow's philanthropist. So they had a very good respect for the students. So I appreciated how they treated me and what I learned there. And the most important thing, of course, was learning how to work with classmates from around the world, in particular meeting folks from the US and Canada. There were some Canadian students there, I remember. Some hot shots coming from places like MIT, Harvard. So, and that, when you realize that you can also compete with those folks, it was an interesting thing. Now, the aspect of competition, I believe, was much stronger back then. I think now, hopefully, and this is, I guess, an observation I'm making here, we would want science to be more collaborative, cooperative, working in teams. This business of competing with your classmate and so forth. I think we should say it. You prove that you know things, that you can be a valuable contributor, and the order in which the contributions are made, it's not that important. But you're learning and you're interested and you're passionate about the subject. That's how I would phrase it these days. And that, I think, has changed a lot. We had an exam. It was an oral examination. Only one exam. It was an oral 3-hour examination on 5 topics. And quite some interesting stories about that. But that's very particular to the mathematical fold. After that, I applied for jobs. So, well, let's see what happens, Did I think about a job in industry? Well, yeah, I did think, say if I don't get a job that I like in academia, A, I can go back to Mexico, or B, I can explore other options, in that sense. Although I must say back then, we were very focused on academia, and there was a lot, and again, this is another note of caution, folks that did not continue in academia, it was considered like, what happened, And that's something which is changing and should change, because not all PhD students should go into academia. And in fact, there's a big portions of research, development, innovation happening in the private sector. And in places like the US and parts of Canada, there are companies where there's a lot of research going on, and a lot of things you can do for society that are not directly connected to academic research. And I'll come back to this later as part of one of the roles I played at NITEX, where we have some lessons to share there. So anyway, I applied for postdoctoral positions, and I was lucky to get a job at Stanford University. And they had so I said, oh, wow, okay, go to Stanford. And I remember my advisor telling me that Stanford has a lot of traditions, some of which are not particularly good compared to ours, but please go. And so, okay, off I went to California, and I had a family, I had my wife and a small child, we moved there. And that's another important point, having a family while you're a graduate student, having the support to be able to have a family and live a life. And I'll always be grateful to the folks in Mexico who supported me with a fellowship. I had a fellowship for 3 years while I was at Princeton. And afterwards, I had a fellowship from the Sloan Foundation. The adequate support for your graduate studies is extremely important. And we see this as a very hot topic in Canada. And it is really, and back then we would never dream of paying tuition. And as a PhD student, they would not, because the tuition was so outrageously high at Princeton, they'd never expect a mathematics PhD student to pay tuition. So that's another issue which I think we have to reckon with. And the models have changed. And in some sense, this is we have not made that much progress in that aspect. And that really, the last thing we want is for science to be just for people who have resources already. That's the way it should be. So anyway, I was fortunate in that regard. And then as I went to Stanford and I got my job, I remember my first job there, I had to teach 5 courses a year. It was a postdoc with teaching responsibilities because in mathematics, you have to teach to get a job, right? So when I tell people now that I used to teach 5 courses per year, they're like shocked. But okay, I also wrote papers with colleagues there. I got a grant. And so that when I applied for tenure track jobs, I got many offers, and I took a professorship at the University of Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, what I remember from the postdoctoral years, and I think this was an important thing for me, I decided I would work with any professor who would listen to me and give me the time of day. I would do my best to learn from them because I was there to learn from them and to collaborate. Hey, why wouldn't I write? And I remember there was a professor who had a reputation for being a real like Scrooge character. In fact, I had been warned about him. You know, better be careful with that guy when you go there. And one day he came into my office and he wrote some formula on the board, and he said, "Would you like to work with me on this?" I said, "Sure, why not? Let's work on it." And we wrote many papers. We wrote a book together. He was a great collaborator, and I realized that he needed to be understood, and we had a complementary expertise, and it was a great collaboration. So again, being open-minded about your collaborations. At the same time, and again, this is something that is very clear now, when you're a postdoc, you need to have a position has to be treated as a colleague. So I'll be always grateful to the folks at Stanford. They treated me as a colleague. I had a title of assistant professor, actually. In mathematics, they give you some special name. It was the name of one of their former colleagues who had died. Well, the Zego assistant professor, a 3-year position, which you could launch your career based on. And so I'm appreciative of the support that they gave me. And they were very, very focused on what came next. And that's extremely important, that in your postdoctoral, if you look for postdocs, if that's a route you wish to take, that there be people there who will be responsible for you for the next stage in your careers. And I would see how worried the professors were when I was applying for tenure track jobs, how worried they were that I would get a job, a good job, a job that I wanted. So anyway, I went to Wisconsin, and then that was back in the Midwest. A terribly cold place, I must say, but very friendly. So we learned all about snow and ice, and I was there for 15 years. And then again, the experience I can tell you there, a very friendly department, very high quality research, and learning to be a researcher. You know, I learned a lot from my colleagues, senior colleagues there, how to write proposals. Again, very important. And after a while, I realized there were things in the department which were, some I liked, some I didn't. So I remember complaining to the chair of the department. And then he said, "Well, why don't you become chair?" Really? Okay. So then a few years later, I found myself as chair of the department after I was nominated by my colleagues. So it was an experience then going into administration. So that again is a key point here. If you want change, it's important sometimes for you to act upon it and get involved. So your time is important, your time in research or what you're doing is important, but your time in terms of the impact that you might have on people and things around you is also important. So I learned a lot in my term there as chair as to how administration works, how the department works, and how the outside world sees, in this case, mathematics and science, and how that all works together. So it was a very, very eye-opening experience for me. From there, I got involved in running institutes, research institutes. That's another interesting direction, the administration of research institutes. And it was mentioned in the introduction, I was actually director of a mathematics institute when I moved to Canada. But I must say that how did it happen that I moved to Canada? Well, I was asked if I was interested in applying for a Canada Research Chair, which was one of the programs developed in Canada in the early O's, late 90s, to attract researchers to Canada. So I was very flattered I was asked to apply. Wow, is this possible? And so I applied and consulted with the family. I was successful, and I was so excited to move to Vancouver, specifically because it's a great location, and to become a faculty member at UBC in the Department of Mathematics. That was in 2005. So that really changed my life. And here again, I should say the lesson is, well, you can't be wedded to where you're working. There are opportunities. Think globally. And your work is, you bring your work with you. If you have the conditions to continue your research project, we'll do that. So I really don't regret that decision. In fact, I really love Canada, and I became a Canadian citizen. As I say, I'm Canadian by choice. And when I arrived here, then, as I mentioned, I was involved in mathematics institutes previously in the US. I was in certain committees. So I got involved with the Pacific Institute for Mathematical Sciences, and I was director there for 7 years. It was a very interesting experience in terms of supporting the mathematical community in the broader sense, and coordinating activities across Western Canada. And this was an NSERC funded institute. So that's where my connections with NSERC became stronger. Of course, the Canada Research Chair is also a Tri-Council program. I also, of course, was supported by Discovery Grants. I really liked the Discovery Grant program. It's one of the reasons I moved to Canada. Discovery Grants are really an excellent program for supporting a researcher in a very broadly. Now, after that, and I don't want to go too far on this, but I do want to take your questions and have some discussion here. The next step was my role at MyTax. I was encouraged to apply for that position. And MyTax is an interesting organization. What it does is provide internships that connect PhD students mostly with companies. So there are projects, and these are funded by a combination of sources from the private sector, from the provinces, and from the federal government. So it was a real opportunity to see how the research can be mobilized to have an impact on companies, most of which are small and medium enterprises. And that's something to know about Canada, that most of the companies are small, and the kind of research they do is not what you see in places like Google or Apple. So, and that's why the Canadian government has these programs to encourage the insertion of PhD students in these companies. So I think it's a great opportunity for students to learn about the private sector, to do research in an experiential learning setting, and also to understand the value of the research to society more broadly. And in particular for immigrants, for new students, new people who are just arrived in Canada to do their PhD, it also provides a connection to the community. So one of the things that we would track at MyTax was that many of the students supported through MyTax would get jobs in the province where they had studied. It would give them a way of getting that connection into the Canadian economy, Canadian society. So that's a program that's grown quite a bit. I think, so when I left, there were about 10,000 per year. Now I think they're close to 20,000 per year. So these are huge opportunities which are there. Sometimes the students know more about them than the advisors. Now, I had a student, I remember a long time ago, who told me about some of their programs, and he was very excited about it. So that's why I learned about MyTax. And he did very well, and now he works in Vancouver in I think, an electronic gaming company. So so that, again, how do you get the kind of experience from graduate school? How do you get the experience that will give you a job in the private sector? Very important. And I think increasingly, most of our graduate students will work in the private sector. Now, whether it will be in Canada or abroad also depends on the kind of opportunities that we create and enhance here in our country. So that's an important point to ponder. And for young people, when they make their decisions, having that kind of experience, I think, is very important. And I think where we're going to, in discussions on the international setting, is a situation where people come in and out of academia and industry with different levels of expertise. I would also throw government, so that we have like the three aspects, academia, industry, and government, kind of becoming more permeable and interrelated, and sharing expertise across these three different kind of pillars. So I was also proud of the Science Policy Fellows program that we created at my tech school. I was there, and that program embeds fellows, postdoctoral fellows in government departments, so that they contribute from their scientific background and get involved in policy. And I know several of them working in the federal government were already making quite an impact on the landscape there. So now from my tax, well, I moved after some years to NSERC, to President of NSERC. And to me, the main motivation was, well, NSERC has given us so much. What can I do to support the activities that NSERC does, maintain the level of support, and do our best to increase and enhance the support for science in the federal government. That's a completely different experience from the past. I'm currently on leave for my position at UBC, so inserted in the federal government, and it's quite an experience to learn how government works and how science is regarded within government. There are many champions for science in government, but there's also the constant need to explain to folks in government, in either the civil service or elected members of government, what the importance of science and research is, not just academically, but also for society, for the health and prosperity of Canadians and of society in general. So it's an interesting challenge. And of course, we work very closely with the other councils in Canada, other scientific funders, a very broad spectrum of them. And it's been very interesting to learn, to work with them, and to see how we can move forward on that. Now, there are obviously some issues that we face, and definitely the issue of funding for students and postdocs is front and center for us. So that's an issue which definitely has to be, I hope, addressed. But at the same time, I think young people have to be aware of the fact that there are opportunities beyond the traditional postdoc models, working in industry, industrial internships, not-for-profits. NSERC has a big program where we connect academics with not-for-profits, for municipalities also, as well as companies. The Alliance program, also lots of international opportunities. Another point, of course, is internationalize. The more international experience you can have as a student, the stronger, I think, your file will be, either for academic work or for working in industry, in the private sector, or in government. Again, I also want to appeal to you to consider careers in government, because there's a lot of work, there's a lot of science happening in government, and there's a lot of need for brilliant, enterprising, diverse scientists working in Ottawa. So, and also in the provincial level, of course, very important. So anyway, that's where I'm at right now. So I'm happy to take your questions and have a discussion. Pass it over to you, Leslie.
Okay, so if you have a question, you can either raise your hand and then we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can type it into the chat and I will read those out. So someone did send me a question. They were wondering about what your motivation was in going into administrative roles.
Okay, so I was initially motivated because there were things which I think could be done better. So I said, well, I'll get involved. Now, in math, we're fortunate that we don't have labs, so I could maintain my academic career while I was doing it. So I would say some of my best work, I did some of my best work while I was chair of the math department. And so, because, I would meet with my students and postdocs, but it's not like I have a whole big team and I don't have to be getting money to support the equipment. So I was fortunate that that's a real characteristic of mathematics. So I was able to maintain what I considered a fairly strong research program with grants and so forth for students, while I was also tackling these bigger issues. I could see the bigger issues that you needed. It's like a log jam. There were like, and of course, every particular situation has things you have to drill down on and think about. For example, I spent a lot of time thinking about how to fund lecture series, how to fund visitors to a department, how to fund a colloquium, things of that kind, where, if there isn't someone who is paying attention to those things, they're not just going to happen, right? And that you have to really be grateful to the folks who are willing to take on those challenges. Well, at the same time, I'm sensitive to being called a bureaucrat. I guess you can call me a bureaucrat now, but always try to be sensitive to where it's all from, where we all come from, and where we all are going back to. No? Because I'm on leave from my position at UBC. I have 2 PhD students, and I just published a paper a couple of months ago. So and I expect to go back when I'm done with this position. So it's important to know where our roots are and make sure that we know what's right for the community.
I think we have a lot of people who are interested in policy.
Okay.
And so you mentioned a science policy fellowship that I think was through my tax. How many different, or how many opportunities are there to do something like a policy type fellowship program?
Yes. Well, in the federal government, and particularly in the councils, we have a certain need for policy experts. And what happens is that many times in the sciences, well, there are people who know policy, but who don't necessarily know science. And having people with a scientific background who could also immerse themselves in policy is a very important, very valuable sort of asset for a funding agency or one of the government departments, which, science-based departments, which there are several of them, very large departments. So now the Science Policy Fellows is a program that they take applications from folks that are interested, and I think they would propose a topic or a department they may want to work with, and the departments would say, we have openings and we're interested in it, and there was like a matching process done. So so we have, for example, of the former fellows, I think, is it 3 of them who are now hired as permanent staff at NSERC, and one of them is a very important person on research security. So a person who works on the international department, another person that works with the data science group. So, and they have that expertise that allows them to be kind of seamlessly talk about policy and science simultaneously. So I think that's very valuable. Now, there are less organized opportunities, which I have noticed exist in Ottawa, and sometimes the professors will say, hey, there's an opening there in policy, why don't you apply? They'll tell their, right? But some of us, folks coming from labs not in Ottawa won't know about them, right? So that's something which but there are many different aspects that need to be studied, and in the end, develop a policy that will be applicable across the board, right? So I think it's underutilized. I think there's much more that can be done in that direction.
Yeah, I think we have people here who would be interested in applying for that sort of thing, but they just don't know where to look for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
I think that's been a challenge. And the other thing you mentioned was careers at NSERC for PhD scientists, and I wondered if you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, well, we have a number of positions where, for example, the support or working on things like discovery grants or the Alliance. and where we require and prefer knowledge, topical knowledge in particular areas. So we have periodically openings in those areas, right? And the question I think for the students is, what's your entry point into government? Because once you want to get a position, I don't know, they have all this hierarchy, GRs, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, EXs, you know, it's like the army. It's like the army. So you want to be a lieutenant. What do you have to be first? You have to be a captain or a major. I don't know how it goes. So once you get to these higher levels, if you haven't been in government, it's very hard to go in, you see? Now, in my case, I went in because it's a governor and council appointment, a special appointment coming from the outside. My job is a 5-year job, you know, and then, you know, I guess I can do a second term, possibly. So it's a different kind of thing. You're in and then out. But the permanent civil servants coming in, you have to find what the right entry level is. So that's where these junior positions are attractive. If you can come in as a policy analyst, for example, as a student, a lot of folks that come in as students working part-time and afterwards are found to be highly competent and are top of mind when those other openings start, right? So there is a group, a level around the postdoctoral level, I would say approximately equivalent to that. But so that's where you want to come into the civil service, right? And I think the councils, and I would say CHR, NSERC, sure, and we do share people, and people move around, right? I think there's a good good opportunities there, but folks have to. I think one of the issues also is the timing. It's not in sync with the academic calendar, right? And the opportunities when these things open up. There are people who are connected in there and know how to recommend their students for that. And again, the folks in Ottawa, there's a lot of stuff happening in Ottawa. What happens in Ottawa stays in Ottawa. But no, we have to spread that out. So absolutely. And we want to diversify the workforce. By the way, it's very important for us. We do have a number of remote employees at NSERC now. During the pandemic, we hired folks across the country, and that really increased the diversity of our workforce, and I expect that will continue to some degree. And again, knowing about these opportunities is very important.
Yeah, I think that our students are familiar with, you know, NSERC and Tri-Council in terms of they know that that's where grants come from. Maybe you could tell them a little bit. One of the things you mentioned was people working on discovery grants or alliance grants. I'm not sure they know what that means. What does that look like in terms of a job? What are the responsibilities?
Oh yeah, well, no, so you essentially want to be like a program officer, so let's talk about the programs. We have 2 big divisions for programs. One is the discovery, research grants and scholarships, which is where all the discovery grants and all the scholarships are. And then the one research partnerships, which is the alliance and all the partnerships with companies, etc. So a lot of it is, of course, running the competitions or the evaluation. So first the intake of the grants, then the setting up the whole adjudication process, selecting the panels, monitoring the panels, sending things out to the right reviewers, and making sure that the whole adjudication process adheres to the standards of fairness. And of course, EDI principles, which are very important. And that's a lot of work, and that's where having some knowledge of the areas is very important. So if, say, you're a physicist and you're connected to the, I don't know, subatomic physics group, you know, which is doing that, obviously that is helpful, very important. I mean, we're not strict disciplinarians, but obviously there's a big role for people with science backgrounds to have there. Now, as you go up in the system, there's increasing responsibility, design of new programs. There are committees that sort of council-wide committees that have to be managed, and a lot of outreach to the community also, going around, visiting with members, going to professional societies, and sharing with them what is going on at NSERC, also hearing from the folks in terms of what they would like to see. We just went through the strategic planning. The strategic plan, we had about, I don't know, we consulted about 2,000 people contacted us, about 30 workshops. So it's all very, very, I would say very community-based in terms of what we do. And now on the other side, the research partnerships, we want to create these partnerships between academia and industry, academia and not-for-profits. So again, having some knowledge of the technologies, the techniques, the science that can be applied and mobilized is very important. Being able to work with partners. You know, we have a lot of work that we do with MyTax, for example, with provincial organizations, a big international program. That's another one. So, but we're talking about the programs, and so there you want to have some maybe hard-nosed knowledge of some of the science and some of the existing programs. You know, many of our folks have gone, were, you know, science students, know about it, and know how they work. You know, in particular, I think our vice president for research grants and scholarships, he was telling me that I think he had USRA, he had the PGS, he had the postdoc, he had every grant possible. So, you know, these guys. So if you know it, nothing like having had it to know it, right? So now there's the other branch is the corporate policy side, and that's where most of the policy. So the programs folks don't do policy, but that's in the third division, which does international policy, corporate. There's a lot of interesting work going on open access, for example. Quite an interesting topic that we're working very hard on. The international in science diplomacy is a very very interesting area. That's where one of the recent MyTax fellows is now in that division. And then for some of the foreign students that have that background, it can be a real advantage for us to have people with that kind of knowledge of the culture, of the language. So these are careers now. The government is it's very good. Government is good to its people. Very stable. Promotions happen. You know, very good benefits. You know, there is of course some governments come and go. There's some movements, but generally speaking, I think it's as employers we do pretty well. There was just a survey that was the results were released recently, and among all the federal agencies, actually NSERC ranked number 4 among all federal agencies in terms of satisfaction. So and the nice thing about NSERC is that it feels academic, but it's really government, right? And we're really serving the tens of thousands of people outside of NSERC, but we still have this very focus on the mission, on the greater good of what we're doing. And that's kind of neat to be able to work in a place where A, you can use your scientific background, and B, where you can believe in what you're working for.
You mentioned open access, and talking about open access, are there changes coming? Can you give us a sneak peek?
Yeah, well, we announced that we are going to align with full open access by, I think, is end of 2025. We're going to be making that decision. We're aligned with what's happening in the US. So and you know, there are these plans like Plan S, you probably know about that one in Europe. Yeah, so there are a number of plans which exist in parts around the world. So we want to come up with a plan that is Canadian, that builds in sort of issues of equity. There are problems with, of course, author page charges. There are, you know, the big publishers. I don't think any solution will please everyone, but the key principle is that federally funded research has to be available to the public from day one, as soon as it's published. So I think that's a principle everyone agrees on. But how we get there is will require. And what we've done is we launched a consultation, and we'll be working with different partners across the country and indeed across the world. Last week, or was it 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting there were folks from NSF, from NIH, from UKRI, DFG, and they were sharing what they're doing, you know, because this is an international thing, and they were sharing their policies, and we're trying to get best practices, not reinvent the wheel, and get something that makes sense in the Canadian context. I should also mention that there's a big initiative for open access for government science, spearheaded by the chief science advisor. And they're talking about repositories where folks can satisfy. So I think satisfying open access won't be that problematic. It'll be the issue of where you want to publish in the famous journal. Will our folks be able to publish in the famous journal so they can be competitive with the rest of the world? And that's a difficult situation, because why are they charging $10,000, right, in APCs just for their brand? And that's why I'm a big fan of the archive, and that's how mathematicians satisfy their open access, just by depositing an accepted final version of your paper on the archive, which I believe is hosted at Cornell University.
Yeah,
that was set up actually.
I think for most of us in more biological sciences, we use bioarchive.
Right.
But I thought that didn't satisfy the Tri-Council regulations.
I
Is
think
that going to change?
for us, as far as I understand, for NSERC, you deposit
Actually, it's possible it's CIHR.
Yeah, you deposit the accepted paper there. That is enough for us.
Okay. We have another question in the chat. What are some of the major challenges that you may experience when speaking to stakeholders about the policies that you're trying to pass?
Well, any kind of a new policy will always affect some people more than others, right? So, for example, NSERC sometimes gets criticized because our grants are small. The discovery grants are small. And they say, well, you should have fewer grants and make them bigger. But then, of course, people say, we like the fact that you can get NSERC grants. You can actually get them. It's not super hard. It's a challenge, of course, but and we like that they're accessible, right? That they're creating the conditions for people to get into science. So what is the right balance there between accessibility of the program and the representation of the cost of research? And this is the big problem of Canadian science, because I don't think we have an adequate recognition of the cost of research, because there has been no recognition of inflation somehow. So that's the kind of issue you face, because when you're talking to a broad audience, and also, for example, there'll be folks from big universities. I think McMaster counts as a big university, and the smaller universities feel disadvantaged. So we're always keeping track of the numbers. So in terms of applicants from different universities, different backgrounds, and how they do in the competitions. So that is always a challenge for us, and it's normal, and it's part of the robust discussion we need to have here. Of course, they say more money always solves any argument, but we have to be. It's not just about how much money we get; it's what we do with it. It's very important, and what the impact. One big thing is measuring impact of the investments. I think we could do a better job of that to convince the folks in Ottawa.
Yeah, I think that becomes really hard with basic science, because it's often so many years before you see, the application.
Yes.
But those applications would never have come to light without the basic science.
That's
without
right.
NSERC.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we have to do like some longitudinal studies of where they were, where they are now. And I know there's some CEOs. There was this company, Abcelera. This company. It's a big company now in Vancouver that was doing things with the RNA and creating some things, antiviral things. And the CEO started with the USRA, and he was a physicist actually. And you can track his whole career until now he's a big CEO of a big company. But it was a fundamental science, biology and then physics and biology that then led to those breakthroughs. In the end, it's about ideas. Everything that is commercialized is an idea, and where do these ideas come from? And a lot of the great ideas do come from natural sciences and engineering, and They, of course, need to be adapted to society, and I understand, of course, a lot of that will be multidisciplinary, but a lot of these things are basic science that just has this great, well, we're governed by the laws of science, and discovering those and mobilizing those is what's so fascinating.
We're coming up to an election soon. What do you think is going to happen with science funding?
Well, I think there's a recognition that science and technology, and I want to talk more broadly of science and technology, because we're not just talking about one can't go without the other, right? So a lot of the breakthroughs that kept us going during the pandemic, that will hopefully mitigate or help us get through climate change situation that we're in, right? We'll be in for many decades. These will be scientific and technological breakthroughs that can really make a difference. We see it with the quantum technologies now, huge support for quantum technologies. And so I'm optimistic that any government will understand that they have to support science and technology, because that's where you have kind of the paradigm shifts in how we run society. So it's very important. And I think it's up to us as scientists to explain how the basic, what they call fundamental, I kind of object to that term because I think it's all a continuum, how science feeds into technology, how it feeds into society in a way, right? And I think we can do a much better job of that. We shouldn't be sort of just cordoned off into the ivory tower sort of thing. Oh, you're just doing your theory. No, you're not. You're doing stuff that really will have applications, that will do things. But you can't be thinking about new ideas if you're just focused on what you're going to apply tomorrow, right? It doesn't work that way. But we know that there's a system that can pick up these great ideas and mobilize them. And if we think of some of the greatest scientists in the world, in the history of the world, like Newton, I always think about Newton. Well, that guy was a very practical guy. At some point, he was running the mint in England, and gravity and all that. But he was able to do the calculus, right, and some super theoretical things, right. There are many examples of scientists, who worked on very applied areas and came up with fundamental contributions. So great science comes from great problems. So some of these things, cordon me off from applications because I just want to be pure, or let's forget the pure because I want to just do these applications for tomorrow. That's kind of artificial. It's kind of a particular aspect, and I think if you look at the whole, you see that they have to be integrated. So I just say I'm the eternal optimist, and I also see it in our colleagues in other countries. U.S., there's a big excitement. And that is a bipartisan support for science, and European Union also. So I'm optimistic that Canada will be participating in that, and that our country recognizes the importance of research, science, and its mobilization for improving society.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Do you think, now that I think our students are probably interested, there's been a shift for example, for our department, we've just done a big increase in the salaries for graduate students, recognizing that, it's getting more expensive to live here in Hamilton, and the stipends have been kind of stagnant for a while. So how do you think that's going to affect NSERC or the other tri-councils with everyone's the graduate stipends going up?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges we were facing. There was I just say, like a 20-year period without increases in some of the stipends, and it's kind of tucked away. Somehow the system we have with the discovery grants also doesn't make it very transparent, right? Okay, discovery grants are highly leveraged, and I know that, because my students get a piece of money from this, a piece of money from that, and I mean, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because we want leveraging, but not really recognizing what the cost to a student is I think something that is not right. So we have to recognize what it means, what it takes to be a student, recognize those costs. I think modern society is kind of demands that level of recognition. Now, if you go to Europe, a country like Denmark, graduate students, they have their stipend, they got their 6 weeks of holidays, and it's all, and I think the professors make maybe twice or 3 times as much as the students, but not 100 times. So it's recognizing the student as an employee, as really a research person, not just some ad hoc figure that happens to be in your lab. I mean, I think that's where society is going to. So we are Canada is a country that believes profoundly in fairness, right? And certainly in the government jobs, we got all the benefits and all the things, right, are built in. Otherwise, they wouldn't take those jobs, right? So we're going to a situation. Of course, we want to be flexible, and we have the models in other countries which are, less levels of support, less stability, do more with less, as they say, and certainly we do a lot with relatively small amounts of money. But at some point, you hit the diminishing returns, because it's also an international competition. And if the European Union has those standards, the big countries, and we kind of tend towards a standard which I think, at the very least, should be above poverty line by some important margin. So I think that recognition, and universities are of course involved to some degree, you might say much even more than the agencies, because they have to define what these positions are. How do they recognize what a student is or not, right? And I think that's key. And so we'll see. But there is a big discussion going on in Ottawa about that, and there are plans. And I know the group Support Our Science has been mobilizing support for that, and we're always happy to provide information. We don't lobby because we are government, but we do acknowledge that students could be better supported.
Yeah, I think that we are out of questions. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for our students and postdocs?
Well, I don't know if wisdom, I would say, I think you have to have an open mindset. Sometimes when you hear things from your professors or other folks, they're always affected by what their realities were, right? And I can tell you, the world right now is very different than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And wow, going back to the 70s, when I tell people about things about the 70s, you say, whoa, So there will be, it's your time, and you have to sort of integrate the past. You have to keep that in mind, but there'll be a future which will be different. And it's about seizing opportunities and having the greatest number of qualifications, and that not just technical, also emotional intelligence, and being able to collaborate, knowing international, so that will position people for success. I think also in the future, people will have to retrain, because technologies come and you can be blown away within a few years. So don't think that you'll be just sticking to what you learn in your PhD. There'll be many, many different incarnations of you as a scientist, as an entrepreneur, or just as a member of society. So change management is a big thing. And so flexible thinking, I think, will be a very important asset for the citizen of the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I know you're incredibly busy, and it really meant a lot to us that you were willing to come and talk to everyone. So if everybody can join me in a virtual round of applause for Professor Adem. Thank you so much for coming. For everyone else, we have this seminar series every week, and we have a different speaker. So be sure to check in and join us for some more upcoming seminars.
Thank you for the time. Bye-bye.